Do you pray? Are you a religious person? And when you pray, do you pray to God or do you pray to something else? Do you believe there's more to life after this mortal coil is shed from our bodies? Well, today's case is going to really dig into that question. Welcome back to the Monsters We Make. I am your host, Mr. Multiverse, and I am here to guide you through the world of gods and monsters. But today I will not be alone, for you see, I have brought on a co host to, shall we say, debate the validity of today's case. My good friend Stephen Schinder.
Hi there. And yeah, I feel like the whole gods and monsters tagline is kind of fitting, especially here where religion kind of comes into play.
Yes. Now, the story we're about to tell you, I should say, is a probably the darkest story I have talked about so far on this podcast. So if you wish not to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we warned you. Our story is that of the exorcism of Regan MacNeil. Now, before we go any further, Stephen, how much do you know about this exorcism case? It was arguably the one of the biggest sensations of 1973. Excuse me.
Right. So I've looked into it, like, done a thorough look through it once a little while ago. I don't remember if it was last year or the year before, but apparently this is something that other people in our field like have studied even more and is really ranked high up there in terms of these types of strange cases.
It's arguably, one would say, the most infamous we've talked about
Right.
so far. Do you believe in exorcism?
Not really. Like, I used to be religious, but I think it's more likely that this could be another instance of, people pass down these stories. And while there are some events that could have played out, I think there are certain aspects where, people pass them along to try to perpetuate some, trying to strike fear in the divine among the more religious people.
All right, this will be interesting because it's fascinating because this and a odd string that followed in other cases, which we will talk about one day. It's fascinating to note that in 1973, this was everywhere. This exorcism case was everywhere. It was in the news, and it was probably because of um, who was the person behind or this exorcism was a part of. Regan MacNeil is the daughter of Chris MacNeil, viewed here on set of the movie her mother was shooting with a director, and it's rumored that she had a love with the late Burt Dennings. Are you
Okay.
familiar with either's work?
Not really. That's kind of a blind spot for me.
Chris MacNeil had done several films. She had been Emmy nominated twice at least at this point. Burt Dennings was more of an auteur director. He had, at this point, before shooting for this film, which I believe was called It Happened on Campus, if I am right. This would have been his sixth film, but he already had gotten at least one Oscar nomination for his third film, A Tale About Town. Now, it's fascinating because both of them, especially Chris MacNeil, had worked together on like three. It would have been fourth at this point with Dennings between the two. But
Okay.
Yeah. So Chris MacNeil was already like a solid name in she was up there for, and she had gotten work after this, but after what happened to her daughter, yeah, her film career kind of was damaged permanently by what happened. Now, um, I let's actually talk about where they were living at the time, Maryland. And oh, that's the wrong image. Basically, what the top image is the house that they lived in, and the bottom image is the renovated house, because apparently the MacNeil house exploded several years after the quote unquote exorcism occurred, and they rebuilt it from the remains. But no one lives in that house.
Huh. Well, was that due to a gas leak or something else?
That it's that is the leading theory for the destruction of the original MacNeil house, but it is said that it was due to demonic activity that happened afterwards that did involve Regan MacNeil once again.
Right, sure it was.
Look, dude, I get that you're not a believer, but there are some things in this case that just don't make sense, and I can't explain it. It's the same thing of like when I had trouble explaining the David Kessler case in the previous episode.
No, yeah, I get it. Like, the fear of the unknown really takes a hold of some of us. But yeah, we'll keep on looking at this from different angles as we talk about it.
Yeah. So another important figure that we need to talk about is that of there are several key people in here, but I think it's important to note that there's one other person I think is just as important as Regan, and is just as important as Regan is, and that is this gentleman right here, Father Damien Karras. Karras was the local chaplain at the college that the film was being shot at. For all intents and purposes, he was also a boxer. He was also a licensed therapist.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So he had like a few different talents.
Yeah. It's very clear that he was a man of several talents. And it's also very important to note that the church, shortly before the quote unquote exorcism took place, was defiled the day of shooting of the image I showed you. It coincided like earlier that day of this defilement, which I cannot show you. It is, first off, it's hard to find any pictures of what happened in that church, but the descriptions are very visceral. Now, Father Karras was at the time, according to inside sources like several friends, interviews with other members of the clergy, Karras was planning on leaving the church. He felt kind of despondent over several things that had occurred. I think also the defilement of the church was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, but also his mother's health was failing at the time. And in fact, she died very shortly after having a slip and fall and being put in a community home by her brother, against Damien's wishes.
Wow, so this really was a perfect storm of all these different events coinciding with each other.
It's very scary as to how that all occurred. Like it's very it is, like you said, a perfect storm. And there is one more person we need to talk about before we go further into the Regan MacNeil case again, but he won't play a part until later. But I think it's vital we do talk about him a little right now. And that is this man right here in this image from northern Iraq, actually. The man on the right, and that statue is going to play a role into what we're talking about as well. The man on the right is Father Lancaster Marin. He was a priest who was also an archaeologist who was in a dig in northern Iraq at the time. He had been working there for several months, but then mysteriously he decided, I don't want to be there anymore, and returned back to the States.
Huh. Well, he could have been homesick,
I don't
having
know.
traveled so far and then having been there for a bit.
Well, that's the funny thing, because for all intents and purposes, he was excited about the dig. And then after discovering that statue, he left. Now, I should also mention that Father Merrin was a exorcist in his younger years. In 1947, he was a part of an exorcism in northern Africa. And it took months, and it, according to some sources, said it nearly broke him. And the demon, if you are to believe such things, was named Pazuzu, which is the statue in that image I showed you. Pazuzu,
Right.
Pazuzu in demonology is a very powerful, dark spirit, and one that doesn't let grievances go lightly. So we'll talk more about this Pazuzu and Marin connection later. But at the same time, going back to, finally, we get back to Regan and Chris MacNeil. At the time, Regan was playing around, allegedly, according to inside sources from employees that were on MacNeil's staff, Chris MacNeil's staff, and Regan had been playing with a Ouija board and was talking to a being called Captain Howdy. Now, at the time, it's also there was also other occurrences going on in the house, again, allegedly, such as banging in the walls, like scratching in the attic, and just cold spots or sudden bursts of fire from a candle.
Right. So for the scratching, like they didn't find any rats or any sort of infestation, something like that.
Yeah, that's that what was said. They put up traps and everything, but they just chalked up to rats. This is where things, at first you would think, oh, it's nothing, but then Regan's health started to deteriorate. She was growing. She was becoming. It was right after her birthday, in fact, where she was becoming ill. She was pale. She was also having bouts of just absolute, just psychotic episodes. And also, according to one interview from, again, one of MacNeil's former employees, she said that the bed was rocking with Regan on it, being thrown around like a doll. I really would love to see you explain that, Stephen.
Well, did they take her to a hospital and have a doctor do a checkup on her?
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad you asked that, because I do have some photographic evidence of that actually happening. This is Regan during one of her they were checking her brain for like a tumor or some kind of abscess in her skull. They had looked for several hours, done multiple tests that must have cost thousands of dollars for her mom.
Huh.
Yeah. So, but there was nothing to be found. I can look up the medical records for you right now, and it would all point to there was no abscess, no tumors, no short in her brain. And also, how do you explain the reports of her speaking Latin?
Huh. So there's the speaking Latin, there's the like rocking back and forth in the bed, and what were like a couple of the other things?
There was also She was running a constant high fever. She was also becoming more aggressive.
Hmm.
And these we'll talk more about it getting worse in a moment, but I would really love to hear your thoughts on like what's your explanation here if there's no case of like an abscess or a tumor or some kind of other health condition. Like, how do you explain a 10 to 11-year-old child speaking perfect Latin and also moving the way she did? And also, how do you explain the bed rocking?
Well, so I'm not sure that I can explain the perfect Latin if she did indeed speak perfect Latin. Like, I don't know if there's an actual
Oh, there is
recording.
there was, excuse me, a recording by Damien Karras when he, and we'll talk about more in Karras in a moment, but he did record the child speaking perfect Latin.
Huh. Yeah. Well, for a couple of the other things, I was gonna suggest that maybe some of the symptoms could have been stress induced, because a couple years ago I did go to urgent care because I felt like there was maybe something wrong with my body, but when they checked, they like didn't find anything, and so I thought to myself, this all must be stress induced because of a couple of different huge things I was worried about then. So there, I feel like some of it could be psychological. I do also wonder if a couple of these details, like the rocking bed or something, could be perhaps exaggerated.
I mean, it's possible, but at the same time, how again we go back to the Latin thing, and on top of that, we also have. I mean, you could make the argument that maybe Reagan was acting out because her father was not giving her the attention, but again, the sickness, and also several nights later, there was a party, like a rap party for the film that Burt Dennings had just finished with Chris, and Reagan went into the living room while everyone was was singing together, and Reagan urinated in front of everyone before being brought upstairs. Not before telling one of the members, who was an astronaut, "You're going to die up there."
Right. That does sound to me like the urinating could be very well stress induced for all we know, and the saying "you're gonna die up there" could be a form of acting out. Um, as for the again, I keep trying to think back to the Latin, trying to piece the puzzle there. She wasn't being taught Latin at school around this time, was she?
No, she was not. In fact, when she started getting sick, she was kept at home in her room for a good several hours. I mean, like for the rest of her days until they moved. And this also, this comes now to where things get really intense because shortly after that rap party, Burt Dennings was found murdered at the home of Christy MacNeil. He had fallen. This is the police report filed by, and a lot of the evidence comes from this man right here, Lieutenant William Kinderman. Kinderman had a very illustrious career in the state. He actually was the guy who captured the Gemini killer 15 years prior. But then he was also involved in the copycat Gemini killings in 1990.
Huh.
Now, Kinderman was assigned to this case, but some would say that he took on the case I'm about to tell you because he was also a bit of a cinephile. His favorite movie were like Casablanca and It's a Wonderful Life. He also really wanted to meet Chris MacNeil. In fact, he got an autograph from her. In fact, it was the last autograph she gave anyone before she shortly quit her acting career. Detective Kinderman was assigned to the case of Burt Dennings' death and how bizarre it was, because Burt Dennings went into the MacNeil house to watch Regan, and from Regan's window, he fell but his head had been twisted 180 degrees.
Huh. And we have evidence of this?
We do. Coronary reports, it was a perfect, like, it was like twisting a bottle cap.
Wow. And do we know for sure that the recording of her speaking Latin, like, do we know for sure that the recording wasn't manipulated or edited in any way?
You see, that's the problem, is that a lot of this case was mishandled because of church interference, because of what happened next. Now, but I want to talk a bit more about the Burt Dennings part, because this is going to be very important.
Right.
It's interesting that what was Burke doing at the house to begin with? And why was he in Regan's room?
Yeah, that does raise some questions. Yeah, but I keep wondering if like there's like another angle here and like people want to like cover up certain things.
I see that I don't know, because the church got very involved, and that recording was confiscated by members of the clergy. But I can't really speak on that at the moment. But again, why was Burke Dennings in Regan's room, and how did he get out of the window and fall? And even as Kinderman described in his report, it is a 1 in a million shot that his head would twist like that when he hit the ground.
Well, even if it's 1 in a million, that doesn't mean it's completely impossible. I kind of think that people want to believe there's a supernatural angle to the head twisting that way, when really it could have just been a very rare instance of that being able to happen.
Okay, you're gonna have to explain this to me like I'm dumb, because according to the coronary reports, Burke Dennings' neck and the impact on his head, which I will grant you that could have been the 1 in a million case. But how do you explain? The coronary report said that the neck twist happened prior to the fall. The twist and the bruising on the neck and how it was twisted, it doesn't explain, like, oh, did he just get twisted like in a Looney Tunes cartoon and then fall out the window? And also, how do you explain that in the first place? Like the head twist to begin with, if he was in a room with Regan, a small child.
And we don't know if there was anyone else in the room, do we?
We do not.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, to rationally explain it, that would be my instinct, that maybe there had to have been someone else in the room. I just don't know who. Because a small child definitely cannot do that.
No. Now, Kinderman had interviewed several people, such as Father Karras. The two actually became friends during the Kinderman's investigation. They both bonded over movies. It's also noted that he befriended another man who he'd have a very long friendship with, Father Dyer, who was also a mutual friend of Karras. Dyer was murdered in 1990 during the copycat Gemini killings. But that's a case for another time. But Dyer played an ancillary part to this tale. Now, I have to stress that Regan's condition was getting worse. In fact, I'll show you an image of a photo taken at Regan by Regan at her house when she was being interviewed by doctors and a psychiatrist. This is Regan during the interview.
Oh yeah, it doesn't look like she was doing too well.
No, they were during this psychological evaluation. The therapist at the scene asked, "Can he talk to Captain Howdy?" And then she flew into the rage. And shortly thereafter, she was seen. Now, this one's brutal. So any listener watching, you might want to stop here. what was said after was Regan was stabbing a cross into. I'm just going by the report here, by the accounts of, again, MacNeil's employees who also witnessed it, into her private areas. Not to get too graphic. She was also yelling obscenities and struck MacNeil when the door closed by itself. And according to other sources, the dresser moved and almost crushed Chris MacNeil.
Wow. I feel like some of these details, you know, there are definitely some sick individuals who would relay those to maybe sensationalize the whole thing. But yeah, like all this stuff that's in the report, it's like, how do you explain some of this and like why these details are here?
It's hard, right? Like, I know you're a skeptic and all, but like, how do you explain any of this? Like, it's, again, it's all like testimony on hearsay, but like, it's very convincing. I mean, it was hard for me to explain the Kessler case last session, and this is giving me the same kind of vibes.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know, man. Like, at this point, Chris MacNeil was just in hysterics. Like, she had nowhere to go. She was not finding anything. She was hemorrhaging money at this point. And she was also dealing with the death of Bert Dennings, which she probably had to have known Regan had something to do with it at this point.
Yeah.
So, according to sources within the hospital, one of the doctors suggested maybe an exorcism. Now, you have to understand that exorcism wasn't a major thing anymore in the church at this point in 1973. That's like saying to a person, go get a witch doctor.
Yeah, they think that there's this ancient evil that's so big that they have to resort, you know, they're desperate enough to try something like this.
Yeah. So this is where Father Karras comes back into the play. And mind you, he had just lost his mother. So in just a last resort, Hail Mary, one might say, Miss MacNeil found Father Karras and asked him for an exorcism. And he refuted, because he was like, the church doesn't do that. We don't do that anymore. But she begged him to see Regan. And that's how we got the Latin recordings. Now, he did say in a report that he threw regular water, not holy water, and she reacted. And then she also projectile vomited onto Father Karras.
Huh. See, like, this type of thing does, again, make me wonder if some of this could have been exaggerated to create more believers in the church, you know?
Yeah, but how do you explain the other stuff that I just talked about? And
yeah, it's definitely a lot of food for thought, for sure. It's just like, can't help but come back to that possibility that, you know, some people exaggerate things to benefit their organization.
I mean, I wouldn't put it past the church. I mean, after these exorcisms, a strong number, there was a increase in church, what's the word I'm looking for? Church going, or church acceptance or new members shortly after this exorcism case broke. But at this point, Father Karras spoke to the clergy, and it spoke to Father Dyer. And it was suggested that, from the reports we know, they actually contacted Father Marin after he returned from the Northern Iraq expedition to perform the exorcism, because that was apparently the only like priest they knew who actually was a practiced and experienced exorcist. They also said that Karras was allowed to join in the exorcism because he was a licensed psychiatrist, and they wanted to have some. I think the thought process was maybe they wanted to have some validity to it, maybe just to have Marin there, and also have Marin a psychiatrist just to help break whatever mental state Regan was in.
Right. Yeah, they had to cover their bases.
I would assume. Now, when Marin arrived at the Regan house, there is a photo that was taken from across the street by a man passing that has been synonymously connected to this case. That's the photo, and yeah, it's almost like a light is shining from, and that is Regan's bedroom where the light is emanating from, right there.
Yeah, it does kind of feel like another one of those 1 in a million shots, and to have a couple of those involved in the same thing, it really is bizarre.
Yeah. Now, this was shot by one of Miss MacNeil's employees, excuse me, and this is the last known photo of Father Karras of Damien Karras and Lancaster Marin alive, because both died during the exorcism.
Wow.
Yeah. We don't know what happened in there. The room had grown extreme. All we know is, according to reports, they said the room had turned extremely cold, and there were shouting of exorcisms being cast. And then Damien left the room for 20 minutes and left Father Marin alone with Regan, and Marin was reported dead. Shortly thereafter, Karras threw himself out the window, and Regan was seemingly cured. Karras fell down these very steps that are still standing to this day. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be a pretty huge fall.
It was, but how do you explain him jumping at, like, Marin's report? The coronary reports that we know of say that Father Marin died of a heart attack, but maybe he died from the stress of it, or I don't know. But Karras's behavior makes no sense to me. That he was perfectly sane, and then he goes and jumps out of a window. He wasn't thrown. It didn't look like he was thrown. He jumped.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if he had been checked up mentally before, but if he was sane, then I don't know what reason he would have to jump unless he knew something that he didn't want to have to reveal. But ultimately, that's just something we don't know.
Yeah. It's that entire exorcism, we know nothing. Whatever happened in Regan MacNeil's room cost the lives of 2 men, and a young girl was cured. Now, and also, there was the death of Chris MacNeil's career. She got TV show work and maybe some made-for-TV movies after this, but like, her career was dead after all this. There was just a shadow over it.
Yeah, it's a huge, after effect of this whole thing, it seems.
Yeah. So when Father Dyer arrived on the scene, he found Karras at the bottom of the steps and gave him his last rites before Father Karras died. Shortly thereafter, the Regan family moved. They moved, I believe, out west. They moved west, to the West Coast, if I could be wrong, but I think that was where they went. And Detective Kinderman and Father Dyer became close after Karras's passing. And there were other cases that connected to the Regan MacNeil exorcism, such as the repeat Gemini killings I've stated before, and the bizarre destruction of the MacNeil house, but that led to its rebuilding. But this is where our story ends for this one.
Yeah, it really is bizarre. Again, I do think that some of the stuff that happened could be stress induced, but I will admit there are definitely some things that are just really hard to explain.
I mean, all of it is all of it's bizarre. I mean, why? Also, the other thing is Burt Denning's murder. I should add, went it just basically was ruled as a as accidental death. They didn't even bother with Regan at this point. But Karras and Marin's deaths were basically seen by the clergy. Really interfered with the police findings there. It was also important to note that they the church really for a hot minute wanted to label Marin as a heretic afterwards.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is a bizarre case. This is a brutal one too.
Yeah, it's definitely one that has kept people up at night.
Yeah. I mean, and there are other, like I said, there are other ancillary stories that are kind of connected to it. And maybe one day we'll talk more about them. I especially want to talk about the 1990s Gemini killings. But yeah, for right now, this is as far as the story goes. So, Stephen, like, what are your thoughts after hearing all this?
I think that, you know, there could be ways to explain how all this happened, but there are just some answers that are tougher to find or maybe unfindable and will keep us guessing, you know, for years to come.
Yeah, we can only imagine. But, dear listener, this is where our story ends. So we leave it up to you. Was Regan MacNeil truly possessed or not? But a final thought for all of you listening. If you should find yourself along those steps on that campus and you feel a chill run down your spine, maybe that's the answer you'll get. Until next time, dear listener, I'm Mr. Multiverse, and I'd like to thank my friend Stephen Schinder for joining me on this episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
And until next time, this has been a world of gods and monsters.